Okay, so this video is on solving 1- and 2-step inequalities. There are two important rules when solving inequalities. The first one is when you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to flip your inequality sign. So that means if you had a less than sign, you would need to change that to a greater than sign. Okay? And that's only when you multiply or divide by a negative number. Now, the other one is your variable has to be on the left side before you graph. So you have to have x equals a number. So if you have, for example, 6 is less than x, we cannot graph that yet. You have to flip that whole inequality around to make it x greater than 6. How I remember that is, remember this little inequality sign used to be a gator. In elementary school, that was a really bad gator. So that little gator is eating the x, and so you just have to make sure that that gator is also eating that x or opening up to that x when you flip it around. So you can only graph when x is on the left-hand side. So let's try some one-step examples. So I have n minus 10 is greater than 6. So I'm going to plus 10 to both sides. I would get n is greater than 16. So my variable's on the left, I can graph it. That's going to be an open circle on 16 because there is no line underneath that. And for shading purposes, if you want to draw a little arrow with that inequality sign, it's going to say stay to the right. So I'm going to shade everything to the right. So what that means is 16 does not satisfy this inequality because it's open, but 16.1 does, and then everything to the right of it. So 100 would be an answer, 50 would be an answer, just not anything less than a 16. Okay? Alright, on number 2, I noticed something's different. I noticed my x is on the right side. So what that means is I'm going to have to end up flipping something around in the end. But first, I'm dividing by 4. So I would times by 4 on both sides. Common mistake is someone will say, hey, I'm multiplying by a negative number. No, we were multiplying by a positive 4, so my inequality sign is not going to switch. So I would do negative 8 times 4 and get negative 32. I'm going to bring down that greater than or equal to sign and then your x value. Okay? So now, I can't graph yet because my variable's on the right-hand side and I need it to be on the left-hand side. So I'm going to switch everything around and make sure that that inequality sign was still opening up to that negative 32. Okay? So flip the x, flip the negative 32, and flip your sign. So now x is on the left-hand side and I can graph. It's going to be a closed circle on negative 32 because of that equal to sign. And then here's my inequality. If I draw a little arrow, it's going to show me to point to the left. So I'm going to shade everything to the left and draw an arrow. So negative 32 is a solution because it's closed in. Negative 33, negative 34 are all solutions, even to negative 100, but nothing on the right side. Okay? So this one is tricky, one, because the variable is negative, so I'm going to end up dividing by a negative and I'm going to have to flip my sign. And also, since it's on the right side, I'm going to have to flip it again. So if you have a negative number and it's on the right side, you're going to have to do 2 flips. But let's break it down. I'm going to divide by a negative 6 first. Okay? You are going to immediately flip that sign. You divided by a negative, so you have to flip your inequality sign. Okay? Negative 90 divided by negative 6 is going to be 15, positive. And then I'm going to bring my b down. Okay? With inequalities, you have to make sure to bring them directly below what you solved. So what's wrong with this is I have a letter on the right side, so I need to flip the whole problem around and get b less than or equal to a 15. Okay, so now I can go ahead and graph. It's going to be a closed circle on a 15. And then my arrow is pointing that way, so I'm going to shade left with my arrow. Okay, So some things to notice is when it's negative and on the right, when you flip it and then flip it again, your inequality actually ends up being the same, which is cool. So those are all examples of one-step problems. Now we're going to try some two-step problems in the back. So we've got 4 examples of two-step problems. You solve these just like equations. So on this first one, remember I can't multiply by 2 because I have to get rid of this 3 first. So I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. I would get x over 2 is greater than or equal to a negative 5. X is dividing by a 2, so I'm going to times by 2 on both sides. My 2's will cancel. X is greater than or equal to negative 10. So remember, even though that 5 was negative and I was multiplying, I multiplied by a positive 2, so my sign does not switch. So it's going to be a closed circle on a negative 10. And then we are going to shade to the right. Okay. All right, on number 5, I noticed that my variable is on the right side, so I know I'm going to have to flip it in the end. So first thing I'm going to do is subtract 3 on both sides. I would get negative 30 is greater than 5b. I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. I would get negative 6 is greater than b. Okay, so that's a great answer, but to graph it, I'm going to need to flip the whole problem around and get b is less than negative 6. Okay. So I'm going to go to a negative 6. It's going to be an open circle. And I am going to shade to the left. So every number to the left of that is a solution. But negative 6 is not a solution because it was opened. Alright, let's try number 6. So I see the distributive property is what I need to do first. So I'm going to multiply and get negative 4x. I'm going to multiply and get negative 24. Bring down the less than sign in the 16. So on this two-step problem, I'm going to plus 24 on both sides. I would get 40 is less than negative 4x. Last step is to divide by a negative 4. What happens when you divide by a negative 4 or a negative number in general? Your inequality sign is going to flip. So go ahead and flip that inequality sign. Bring down your x and then negative 10. Okay? So now I can graph because my variable is on the left-hand side. I'm going to go to a negative 10 and have an open circle. And I'm going to go to the right. Okay? So everything to the right is a solution. But remember, negative 10 is not because it's opened. Alright, last problem. We have a multiplying problem. So I need to multiply by what's in the denominator first. So I need to times by negative 3 on both sides. Okay? What happens when you multiply or divide by a negative? Your inequality sign has to flip. So I'm going to immediately flip that so I do not forget it. And now these will cancel out. I'm left with negative 15. And I'm going to bring down 5 plus p. One-step problem now where I will subtract 5 on both sides. And get p is greater than or equal to negative 20. Okay, so now I'm going to graph that inequalities answer. So I'm going to go to negative 20 and it'd be close. And then that arrow is pointing right. So I'm going to shade everything to the right. Okay, so negative 20 is a solution, and then everything to the right would work as well. Okay, so those are two-step and one-step inequalities. Remember, the most important rules are when you multiply or divide by a negative, your sign has to flip. And then also, if your variable is on the right side, you're going to have to flip that whole inequality around to graph it. Okay, so IX cells that you can work on now. You can finish up this one right here, this one step. Inequality is good to work on. So is K9. And I would actually save these in case you get finished with K7 or K9. But I would start with K7 and K9 first. Okay? Thanks for watching.